Next we have Mike Fong. Hi. So Mike Fong is the founder and CEO of Provoro. Their focus is on providing privacy, counter-surveillance, and security technologies for electronic devices. So prior to founding Provoro, Mike founded Kalens LLC. He has also consulted and served as a board member for companies across many industries, including chairing the Arizona Governors Council on Innovation and Technology. So let's welcome Mike.
Hello. Oh, is this working? Okay. Hello. It's exciting to be here. I'm going to talk about privacy with a very broad paintbrush view on trends and data collection. And then, yes, I will define proximity data. So let me jump in here. So let me start by zooming out and taking a very big picture market perspective. So at this point in time, pretty much every business has become or needs to become a technology business. And the future is all about data. So a couple of quick statistics. The latest Pratt & Whitney jet engine has 5,000 sensors and can generate approximately 10 gigabytes of data per second. As a planet, the latest information I can find is that we generate about 2.5 exabytes of data per day. And 7 of the top 10 most valuable companies by market cap are technology companies with data as either a foundational or core element of their business model. On top of that, there's about a little over 20 million software developers in the world. Over the next 10 years, that's expected to grow to about close to 40 million, and many of those jobs are expected to be working with the data that's being created by all of these devices, individuals, and businesses. So, of course, some of the other trends that are happening here is that consumers tend to like the latest technology. Corporations have an insatiable demand for consumer data, which we'll talk about in more detail, and governments tend to like to gather as much data as possible. The issue, of course, is that as we know in this room, there are major issues with security, and all of this data collection has very profound impacts on privacy for both individuals and for society as a whole. And lots of people trade on this data that's being collected without the permission or even the knowledge of the people about whom the data may be about. So let's talk a little bit about the different types of data. From a security perspective, very common data at rest, data in motion, of course, data in use. So basically data on a device, data transiting between devices. Best practices, you encrypt data at rest, encrypt data in motion, build a perimeter around there, sort of harden and monitor all of the devices and environment and endpoints within the perimeter, and then monitor and remediate when you see the inevitable strange behavior. The issue is that the area around which you can fence is disappearing, and things are moving to the cloud. And of course, you have this BYOD stuff going on. And then you also have this new type of data, which is data created in the presence of an electronic device. So what you say, what you see, where you go, whom you meet, what you do, all those types of things. And that used to be just the domain of intelligence agencies doing targeted surveillance, but now that data can be gathered by lots of different parties, as I'll show you in a little bit. And if you work in the security field, you may say, well, what's the big deal? Well, it is a big deal because if you have to protect executives or government officials or people in your organization who have sensitive conversations or do sensitive things, you need to worry about this threat vector. You don't need to take my word for it. Here's a quote from the former Director of National Intelligence in open testimony in front of Congress. And I think there's a couple things that jump out at me about this. He talks about that intelligence services might use this data, but of course, then what's interesting is the specificity of how that data might be used is sort of the next part of the sentence. And of course, you see here at the end, to gain access to networks or user credentials, which of course is a direct threat to what people in the security community need to worry about. So this slide typically, for the people who aren't deeply versed in the security world, that you want to highlight the fact that there are some really big security issues that as an industry we're trying to wrestle with. I don't really need to speak to that here. The one thing I would say is that one very simplistic way of looking at it is it's like a stack. Whoever's lower in the stack wins. So apps lose to OS, lose to firmware boot prom, lose to chip. And literally every layer of the stack has proven to be compromised. One more slide on security, even though this is a privacy conversation. And this is Shane. I stuck this in here. So this is if you haven't seen this already, this is a great reference model that you should definitely check out. MITRE came out with this attack framework. And this is just a screenshot. But it goes on and on. But they tried to catalog all of the, or many of the different commonly known ways to attack software within enterprises. They have frameworks for mobile devices. And you can click on every one of these boxes and actually get descriptions of these different types of attacks. But what it highlights from a security perspective is, again, it's much easier to be an attacker than a defender because you need to worry about all of this stuff, and the attacker just needs to be successful in one particular type of attack. And very few software developers are deeply versed in secure coding techniques. And so there's a lot of issues with much of the code that's being put out there, and as a result, they're vulnerable here. Roots of trust make a big difference. You got to start there, but this is worth checking out. So, okay, let's talk about data collection for a little bit, and we'll start with the corporate side of the house, and then we'll talk a little bit about the government side and the implications. So, what's amazing here is that Google and Facebook's combined market cap is almost $1.2 trillion. Okay? So now, raise your hand if you use any of these Google services. Anybody use it? Pretty much everybody, so you can't get away. Now, keep your hand up if you don't pay, or I'm sorry, if you do pay Google any money for any of these services. Okay, well, that's good. As an individual, it's very few. It's actually sort of a trick question because Google doesn't really charge for these things, right? And the point is that when they're not charging for these types of services, they're gathering data about the people who use them, and that's what they're monetizing. And so there is a very, very compelling economic incentive for them to gather more and more information so they can further monetize that data. They need to grow as a business. And here's just one example. This is from earlier this year. It was reported that Google is now getting all of the line item detail on credit card transactions so they can combine all of your online activities that they have visibility about and create an integrated online-offline profile to better be able to market to you. And it's not just Google. There's actually an entire industry of over 4,000 companies, $150+ billion of revenue that are data brokers. And what a lot of people don't know is that they have, I think one of these companies has over 700 labels that they try to apply to every single individual about whom they collect information. And some of them are obvious, your age, your income, your mortgage, those types of things. But I've listed a couple of the more potentially concerning or offensive ones. And the big issue is that people don't get a chance to see what labels have been applied to them or know how they're being used, right? And it's continuing to progress. So it's moving past browsing activities in the real world. Companies are now taking these advancements in machine learning that allow them to look at patterns in vast amounts of data to draw inferences about individuals. So things about your attitudes, your beliefs, your opinions, all those types of things that, again, will give them more and more information. And who's heard of psychometrics? Psychometrics is now part of this psychological profiling. It was actually developed in the 80s by a couple of psychologists. It became the default standard for sort of looking at people's psychological profiles. The big issue was that in order to develop that for any person, they had to ask you to fill out a very sort of intrusive and comprehensive and time-consuming questionnaire. So the good news is that they developed it, which is very useful in certain cases. The other piece of good news is that it couldn't be applied to human society. Enter Facebook, right? So you can see if you're reading ahead, I'm guessing. Many of you may have seen this study. Facebook, they determined, researchers said, if we can look at enough likes, we can know you better than your work colleagues, your friends, and potentially even your spouses, which is pretty amazing. And it doesn't stop there. they were able to get to skin color, sexual orientation, all kinds of other types of information just on Facebook likes. So, again, machine learning has many wonderful things. This is sort of the ones when I was putting these slides together, I was like, that's a little bit depressing. So on the positive side for machine learning, you may have seen this week, Google Photos can now recognize your individual pets in pictures. All right, so there are positives clearly as well. Okay, let's talk about government data collection. And for a moment, let's leave behind all of the sort of leaks and revelations about all phone calls, text messages, web traffic that's being vacuumed up and analyzed, stored, those types of things. When you look at the proximity data space, sort of the sensors that are out there, the ubiquity of mobile phones with cameras, video cameras, other types of sensors, here are two ones that jumped out at me just in the last month, which I wasn't aware of. So both Russia and China on a staggering scale, are starting to put together these video cameras and connect them with artificial intelligence. And under the premise of public safety, perfectly valid reason, hey, we'll catch criminals and bad guys. The issue is they're now doing jaywalkers. You cross the street and your picture shows up right there. So the key is if people have the ability to do things with technology, they often will. Here's a great quote from The Economist. And look, there's some great things going on. GDPR and things like that are good strides. But by the same token, you can read this quote by the former director of the NSA and the CIA. There's an inherent tension between security and privacy and data collection that we really need to struggle to solve. If you look at where it's headed, this just came out. Some of you may have seen it, a very comprehensive report, 3,000 some people surveyed. And what's the future of the internet? What are the trends? What are the impacts? And clearly, privacy is one of the biggest things that we need to worry about. And I know that we're close on time, so let me jump ahead. So let's talk about the future of sort of proximity data, sensors, data collection. Voice is one of the biggest ones. Within the next X number of years, the primary interface for all of your electronic devices will be your voice. There's two reasons for that, one obvious, one not so obvious. It's more natural for us as humans to be able to speak about things than to type. The not so obvious one is that one of the reasons that Google is so valuable is they have a near monopoly on search, 88% the last time I checked. And if I build a better digital assistant, I can actually have a chance to disintermediate one of the most valuable tech franchises ever created because I can now speak to my phone instead of ever having to type anything into Google. And this is why Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, Google themselves, and others are spending huge amounts of money to push that forward. And of course, here's an example of just Amazon and the number of people they're applying to the problem. And this little eye chart is really more intended to show you a sense of the scale of the different companies pushing this type of thing. Cross-device tracking. I don't have time to go into too much detail here, but high-frequency beacons, you think you're anonymous, but your app on your phone can pick these things up, tell if you're watching a TV show, a radio program, or going to a website. This data can be combined with other types of information. I'll stop. You can look more into it, but in the interest of time, it's pretty crazy. It's not just audio, it's video. Flickering LEDs that you can't detect can place you within stores, within centimeters, on and on and on. Faces, of course, we talk about all the video collection that's occurring. Pretty amazing things happen. 30 to 40% of diseases have some type of change in your face or skull. So people may be able to detect if something's going on with you even before you know. A little bit more about the facial recognition here. The one thing I'll highlight is 81% accuracy in determining sexuality. In the last 2 weeks, you may have seen articles about there was like a roundup in Chechnya of gay people. They were beaten and tortured, being asked to reveal other gay people in the community. And you can imagine if this type of technology becomes pervasive in these types of environments, some really bad things can happen to people because of it. And it continues. So this is what's happening with sensors. You can scan through this. It's actually pretty amazing. Facial muscles, galvanic skin response, heart rate, pupil dilation. They even think they can, within a few seconds, detect some of your actions before you're even aware of it. If you're getting aroused or irritated or things like that, these types of sensors will be embedded in every type of device that's going to be all around us, and of course, used in ways that you may not anticipate. And let's jump here. Why care? So this is the common thing. People say, oh, I've got nothing to hide. So again, a lot of these slides could be presentations in and of themselves. So I'll let you speed read some of these. But the key point here is that this affects you in ways that you probably don't realize. It actually can cost you money. Companies are moving to individualized underwriting. Phones are 2 times as predictive of you getting in a car crash than normal underwriting methods. Dynamic pricing. If you browse a site on a Mac versus maybe a Chromebook, you can be charged more. The most blatant example of this was a SAT training provider, a difference of several thousand, I think it was almost $2,000 based on the zip code that you reached out to them for. So let me wrap up here. So basically, we talked a little bit about all this enormous data that's being collected and how technology underpins everything in modern business. The ways this data can be used, and of course the issues around privacy and security and the massive potential implications. We also talked about this fact that we all need to be thinking about proximity data as something we need to be aware of and start to protect against. And let me jump over here to my final slide. I'll leave you with some words of wisdom from people from several walks of life. One government, one business, one individual. And if there's any time for questions, I can take a few questions.
Does anyone have any questions?
So this is part question, part comment. Thank you for the presentation. This was very informative. I think, we've done a great job of, saying over and over again that, we are losing privacy slowly. Well, I don't know if slowly, but surely. I don't think we have done as good a job of explaining to people why that privacy matters. So, even like your presentation, you did a great job, and you kind of got to the implications part, and that was, that kind of skipped over. Like one of the books that you mentioned that was on the slide, I highly recommend that everyone reads it. It's called Weapons of Mass Destruction by Cathy O'Neill, where she talks about how the kind of data that is collected on you can be used to discriminate against you, right? So, if it can be tracked that you're about to get pregnant, employers can discriminate against you, like health insurance can discriminate against you. Looking at your Facebook data and the kind of things that you like on Facebook, health insurance companies can predict whether or not you're about to fall sick, and what is the probability of you having any chronic illness.
Yeah, there's other examples in that book, insurance rates, rates you get charged for loans, sentencing guidelines if you commit a crime. And of course, it's been proven that there's biases in the algorithms there. And again, one of the big issues is people have no idea that these are influencing decisions that affect them personally. And there are proxies. For example, they say, well, you don't get a job because you do a language test and maybe you're not a native English language speaker. But you could be an immigrant. It doesn't mean necessarily anything about your education level. Many, many examples. It's a great book. I agree. Highly recommend checking that out if you're interested in this. So, okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike.